Thanks so much, Max, for sharing this film with me. I'm really excited to be able to speak with you about it. It's one of my favorite films of the year. It's a gorgeous movie, and I think the themes of it really resonate with me as a filmmaker and a lot of the topics that I'm interested in the world. And so I'm thrilled to be able to talk with you about it. Um, I wanted to just start with how did you find this story? How did you get involved in this film and these characters' lives?
Thank you, Alex. So the start of this film was a little convoluted. I was visiting a commune, an environmental commune in the West Country here in England to make a short. And whilst I was there, I met this kind of pig farmer, come cheesemaker, come academic called Simon Farley, who's got a real deep interest in rewilding and species reintroductions. And so we got chatting a lot about that, and he kind of turned me on to two things. Firstly, this traditional way of life that exists in the Pyrenees, which he'd visited the Pyrenees a number of times in the 80s and knew people who'd been shepherds there. And secondly, that bears had been reintroduced to the Pyrenees, which was something that even though it's only one country away, I had absolutely no idea that there were any large predators like that in France left. There's really not very much wilderness left in the UK. So that kind of piqued my interest, and I started reading about the subject and um, found myself bizarrely. I mean, you can probably guess the reason I was staying at the environmental commune was that I'm someone with some environmental fears, but I found myself weirdly identifying quite strongly with this massive backlash against the reintroductions which has happened in the region. So yeah, I just it bothered me because it was a subject in which I felt that I really agreed with both sides of this conflict, and it kept kind of niggling at me, and I kept reading more. But at the time, I didn't speak any French, which is obviously a huge obstacle to making an observational movie in France. And after about a year of this, my friend Leo, who does speak fluent French, said to me, Max, you keep banging on about this subject. Why don't we just drive down to the Pyrenees? We can do it super cheap. I'll translate for you, and we'll see if you still think that there's a film there, which we did. And after about 5 days driving, we got there, and I just fell immediately in love with the place and the people, and yeah, just had this feeling that this was something that I had to do. So I packed in my job and moved back in with my mum and started trying to raise money to go do this. And ended up moving out there and lived there full time for 2 years, and learned to speak fluent French in the process. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, when we started filming The Territory, I didn't speak a lick of Portuguese, but similar process. And yeah, you end up learning as you go. How was it living there? In the film they say that there's no water at the upper, shepherd's house. How did you guys charge batteries? What did production look like for you guys in this remote part of the world?
It was really challenging. It was so, I mean, luckily, Eve doesn't live in the most inhospitable mountain. We had, during casting, visited people who have cabins that are sort of a 7 hour walk from where you can drive to, which, we did a couple of times. Fortunately, they weren't characters we ended up finding interesting. That wasn't the only reason we didn't cast them. But yeah, it was tough. I mean, from where we'd rented a house, it was an hour's drive to the bottom of the mountain, then an hour up an off-road track, and then at least an hour and a half to the first place that Eve was staying, with rucksacks on a really, really steep slope. And there was no electricity at that top cabin. So generally, we would be going for a period of sort of 2 to 3 days, and you'd have to carry everything that you were going to eat, and everything that you needed for production, on your back. So that was pretty exhausting. And moreover, filming in those conditions, it's hard enough to have a stable shot when you're walking down a road. When you're following someone up a steep mountain pass, it's also, well, it's much harder. So yeah, it was physically very, very demanding, but I think that I was very lucky in that the two people who lived with me for the duration of this time, Clément Beauvoir and Eleanor Voisard, who were all, the team who were there shooting with me, really kind of embraced that challenge, and the physicality of that job, and if anything, it being hard meant that we wanted to do it more. So yeah, very blessed to have had such good collaborators.
Yeah, and I mean, the stability of the cinematography is one of the things that jumps out to you from the first shots. This is not a film that's handheld. Clearly there's a lot of stability and a lot of control in the way that you're choosing to move the camera. Can you talk a little bit about how you settled in on that visual language for the film?
So I think it was very important to us from the beginning that we had kind of a consistent visual language, especially knowing that we were going to be multiple shooters. So I shot about a third of the film, Clement shot about a third of the film, and Eleanor shot about a third of the film. And we knew that if we didn't set pretty strict rules, that footage wasn't going to match together. Um, so we ended up kind of building this rig with the help of Torsten Tilo, kind of based around a C70 on a Ronin with some great Sigma Cineprime lenses, and kind of playing around with that rig. And then reviewing rushes came to this kind of agreement of this visual language in which the subjects are pretty much always center framed, and we have a consistent aperture throughout the whole film. I don't know if this is getting too technical, but yeah, it was something we put a lot of thought into, and we tried out a few approaches, and then tried editing a few scenes together before we settled on one thing, and then just stuck with it pretty religiously through the 2 years of production.
Yeah, I mean it is one of my favorite parts of the film are, the limits that you've placed on the story in terms of the visual language. It feels really well defined, a really strong directorial voice from you in that. And then also in terms of the story, that it's really well confined. This is a story about man and nature. It's about, Rousseau. It's about all these big ideas, but packed into this one small village in the Pyrenees where everybody seems to have a direct relationship with each other. The different characters feel like they're living in the same small patch of land. Can you talk a bit more about that casting process and how you came to sort of define what your limits would be in terms of the story you were telling?
Thank you. So I think that the casting was really, really extensive. When we first came to this region, it was pretty clear that there was a film that was possible in which you just interviewed the people who tend to talk on this subject. You can interview ecologists, and then you can interview local politicians who mainly are elected on the back of opposing the bear. And I think that most people, when they come to a subject like this, if you just explain, there's a reintroduction of an apex predator in a region where a lot of people live, and the people don't want it, there, most people instinctively have an idea of, which team they're on. You're either team ecologists or your team farmers. And I realized that if we just had polemicists presenting an opinion, no one was going to kind of be challenged in those assumptions as to what the right and the wrong of the situation is. So we wanted to find people. We wanted to not use interview. We wanted to find people who kind of live this conflict, and whose daily lives actually intersect with this issue, such that you can care about those characters and you can actually identify, okay, I might really believe in protecting species like bears in places where we can, but I can also understand why this is really, really difficult and problematic and upsetting to someone like Eve or to someone like Lisa. And by the same token, understanding the value of these animals through the perspective of someone like Cyril. So we met a load of people. I mean, we probably met about 500 people through the casting process. It was about 6 months of living in the Pyrenees before we'd even met Eve. And really that was just trying to figure out, okay, who's got a story that can be told in the present tense and that isn't just going to be kind of theoretical. This is what I believe, and who's also going to accept the camera, because it was really invasive. I mean, we filmed 500 hours in total for this movie, And most of the film is shot on a 24, which means that when you see those close-ups of Eve, the camera is this far away from his face. And that's obviously not something that everyone's up for. So that was also a consideration of who could be natural with the camera and accept this level of imposition in their lives. And we were very lucky that even Cyril and Lisa did.
Yeah, it's, my favorite films are the ones where I think you flip-flop multiple times back and forth in terms of how you view a given issue. And in this film, I felt myself moving back and forth between understanding the environmentalist point of view, understanding the shepherd's point of view, probably half a dozen times. So I think it really succeeded in that. Um, can you talk a little bit about like the score and the sound design? The wind instruments were gorgeous. Who did you work with on that? How did you come together with the sound of the film?
So that was something, I mean, I'm someone who's obsessed with music, so that was something that was always going to be a priority for whatever I was going to make. But particularly given the fact there's no interview in the film, it became pretty apparent that the score was going to do more than just accentuate the emotional beats of the film. It was also sometimes going to have an instructive kind of role. And so I listened to loads and loads and loads of different composers and met with lots and lots of different composers and eventually met this wonderful composer called Amin Buhafa, who's just recently done the voice of Inrajab, and before that did Four Daughters. And he just was a fantastic collaborator and someone who was really up for maybe going slightly the long way on this. We didn't edit the film with temp music. Occasionally we did, but for the most part, we wrote the music with the scenes, which is a really long process of push and pull. And similarly to casting for the characters in the film, we also did a really long casting for the instruments that would come to make up the score, which again we wanted to be quite limited. We didn't want to have, huge. There is one moment where there's a full orchestra, but mostly, there's an instrument for Eve, there's an instrument for the mountain. Each thing is, doing a few. Every instrument that we're using is doing a few things, and we're not trying to call on, 100 saxophones or 100 trumpets at one time. So Amin brought in a lot of different players to his studio and wrote music for them, and then we'd listen to it and we'd work up cues, and then we'd try scenes and it wouldn't work and we'd come back. So it was a real push and pull, and I think very honored to have been with someone like Amin who's up for doing that and for taking maybe a more active role in the editorial side of the movie rather than just turning up and scoring it once the movie was done and the picture was locked.
Yeah, yeah. And you had, multiple roles in this. You were directing, producing, writing. I imagine, really deeply involved in the edit as well. Um, the edit I thought was really funny at times in a way that I didn't totally expect. The scene where they're chasing the chicken around is hilarious. The introduction to the musician come shepherd character also was really kind of funny in a tongue-in-cheek way. Um, how did you guys strike that balance? Did you find that things were funny as you were filming them, or did you try to imbue some humor on it in the edit later on? How did that come together?
A mix of both. I mean, stuff like the chicken. I mean, that's you couldn't that was just funny to begin with. I think they were probably
Yeah.
laughing afterwards. Um, yeah, it was a tough one because also, I mean, we felt that Eve's world, as much as there's something that's very seductive about it, is incredibly weighty and sinister and I guess negative in the sense that you're at the end of something and he knows and feels that he's at the end of something. So I think we were always looking for the humor. um, we've probably lost a lot of jokes through the edit, sadly, but I guess you end up with what's essential. Some of my favorite images before we even arrived in the Pyrenees from the archive that we'd seen was big burly agricultural guys carrying around teddy bears on nooses and these kind of things. I mean, there's just something that's quite
Oh my God.
ridiculous about this conflict in the first place. So we wanted to lean into that. I wish we'd been able to keep more humor in it. I guess it ended up I mean, I'm glad that you felt that it balanced, but I'm always trying to crack jokes, so I'm sad I didn't manage to squeeze in more.
No, I definitely felt it. Um, I also wanted to ask how, I think this film is probably going to challenge a lot of people. You and I are both come to this from an environmental perspective, but it really takes on an opposing view with, it seriously considers it and forces you to reckon with some opposing views. How do you feel like, or do you feel like your views on this issue were changed during the making of it, or your views on filmmaking? How has this process changed you?
I mean, I guess the thing that really drew me there in the first place was this idea that I'm not sure who I agree with.
Mhm.
And I think I was really excited in the context of where we are at the moment politically across the West, of really extreme voices who shout at one another and who don't see the validity and the humanity in the opposing sides take on life. I was excited that this hopefully was a way of doing that and of presenting two sides of an argument and humanizing two sides of an argument such that an audience can identify and empathize with both of them. So I guess that was always with me from the beginning. I guess I, yeah, I felt myself being pushed and pulled in a lot of different directions and sometimes in unexpected ways. I mean, it's really difficult when you spend time with someone like Eve and, you wake up in the morning and, you know, there are animals who have been killed in the night, and as much as they're being reared for meat, that has a real emotional weight for him and for Lisa as well. Um, and at times like that, I found myself feeling, incredibly upset by the fact that this was happening, even though it's, ostensibly why I was there. Um, but it doesn't change the fact that I think if we can't make this work in this part of the world with all of this European money where relatively few people actually live, we're kind of in a bit of trouble globally. And therefore, I feel that there is something that's important. So, yeah, I guess I don't know really where I land on either side of the debate. I felt quite extremely strongly in both directions, but I guess have ended up not going anywhere and still not knowing what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah. There's a line from one of the characters, or maybe it's on the radio, I think, as they're in the car. But how can we condemn those that are burning the rainforest if we can't even get our house in order here? And that really made me think about some of the characters in my last film and, challenging some of the beliefs that I came into that with. So yeah, really, really effective, I think, in forcing you to rethink your own principles around some of these inherited doctrines that we have about environmentalism and the protection of nature and what that really means. Um, yeah, so I just wanted to congratulate you on this film. It's an amazing, especially for a first feature film, incredible voice that you came into this with. Um, it's one of my favorite films of the year. As I've said, it's beautifully shot, beautifully edited, and a real sense of dedication that I think you can feel through the images and the scenes that you were there in person shooting this, for years and years, and it's a real gift to those of us that were able to watch it. So thanks for making it. I can't wait to see what it is you do next. And everybody go tell your friends about The Shepherd and the Bear.
Thank you so much, Alex.